Hello, in Britain we have a serious problem of homelessness, and yet there is over 1 million homes abandoned and falling into dereliction in Britain. Now, this has got to do with the Achilles heel of old style capitalism as opposed to a free market or a social market, which both have an element that and a mechanism between the intersection between the intersection between supply and demand, which would create a more equal plateau. But old style capitalism, as is evident in Britain and in America for many years, has created one single problem, which is at the heart of why old style capitalism doesn't work, and that is unattainable surplus. That is because the effectiveness of capitalism is that it produces a bounty of goods. There's no denying that. There is a bounty of goods, but they are not distributed according to price. There are other reasons why the price mechanism in capitalism doesn't work, because as it says in the word capitalism, it is about those people who own capital. It's not a free market. If anything, capitalism is a point between feudalism and free market. Now, the conception of a free market is that the price mechanism works perfectly and distributes wealth due to supply and demand, and supply and demand are the only factors involved. Now, conceptually this works, but yet, just like communists have never really achieved communism where everyone is equal and everything is shared, so a free market system where price dictates to all people, no matter whether they're rich or poor, that everyone has an equal opportunity to earn money, and therefore then the government would evaporate, and we would, both communism and a free market system, lead to anarchism. Okay, that's not chaos but a natural order, so to speak. Now, these are all conceptual terms, but the real reality is that in Britain, as I said, there's 1 million abandoned homes and they're falling into dereliction. So it can't be due to a lack of supply, and yet we have homelessness. Okay, people are falling out through the system. Well, price may be affected by cultural or social phenomena, such as people wanting to keep other people out of certain areas. So you'll see gated communities spring up on one hand and slums on another. Okay, the way to fix this problem, my belief, is to decouple the link between having a tremendous amount of wealth and property. Therefore, the rich in the future could perhaps live in apartment buildings, and the middle class would have houses with gardens. Now, this might not seem at first very practical, but if there were large sort of skyscraper type buildings which relied on rent for their income, and that rent came from people who were already rich and thus mobile and had reason to move around the world globally, then those social services which are now focused at the moment on the poor would therefore be focused on the rich, and therefore, because the rich have always in the great scheme of things had more power and influence, those social services would be spread out throughout the surplus of those social services would be spread out throughout the whole community. Okay, that wouldn't be the intention. The intention of the rich is always to keep as much money and power for themselves. Okay, but the byproduct of that, if you're going simply on a capitalist system, would be that social services would be producing greater and greater surpluses, and so therefore they would spread out. Now, this thus decouples the link between ownership of large amounts of property, which is creating this problem of millions of abandoned houses, because statistically, because we haven't solved the problem of people with a lot of wealth and a lot of education having more children. Instead, they're having less children but owning more properties, which they then have no one to pass on to. They have no one to pass those properties on to, and as they live longer, those properties that they do own are in occupancy, often left without anyone living in them. For instance, the house that I'm living in now used to be owned by somebody who had 5 houses and a holiday home, and their business was abroad. So those 5 houses were never occupied. So when we bought this house, the state of the house was terrible, and then we've had to improve it over the time that we've been living in. So the problem is that, of course, if someone is elderly but they own a lot of property, as happened in Mayfair recently, as you see, people who needed a house and they were squatters, but unfortunately they invited people for a party, and then those people invited some other people, and then there was a great big riot in Mayfair. That was because somebody who owned that property obviously died and never got through the legal process of relinquishing that property onto someone. So you've got all these massive mansions in Mayfair being used for nothing, and when the housing price falls in a recession, those houses will be chopped up and turned into slum dwelling flats, and then there'll be and then, as I said in my previous video, there's always a need for more labour in a capitalist system, and so those if people with education are not having large families, and thus dividing those properties down into the sort of lower middle class, working class people who are, I think, are the backbone of our society, who produce the doctors, the scientists, the teachers, the soldiers, the nurses, the policemen, the glue that holds society together, then obviously you're going to have massive mansions that are abandoned and small private and council houses which are overcrowded with people who are being pushed down out of the working class and middle class into an underclass, which is being progressively mixed with people from all different cultures, and who are thus becoming not only estranged from their own culture, but thus the underclass of people of English people are being estranged from the mainstream culture, and so therefore you then go back to a system which is basically overtly feudalist. We do live in a kind of feudalist system, as I said before, because of families like the Bin Ladens are much more powerful than national governments. But national governments are to an extent democratic. And this is why I believe that the European Union and the US Constitution are forces for good, because they bring together a balance between liberty and equality, and that's what's necessary. But we have to do something about this problem, because people in this country are having to leave and go to other countries because they cannot afford to live here. They'll sometimes work in 2 jobs and still cannot afford to buy a house. Now, if the rich were to live in large-scale apartment buildings, as I said before, with massive apartments, you could then always have a rental system that would always be full of houses which are in full occupancy.